In this episode, we speak with Daniel Faber, the co-founder and CEO of Orbit Fab, a company that envisions a thriving in-space market for products and services that support both existing space businesses and new industries like space tourism, manufacturing, and mining. Since 2018, Orbit Fab was founded to eliminate the single-use spacecraft paradigm with in-space refueling. The future for satellites is no longer restricted to the fuel they are launched with. It is about getting the fuel and other materials they need where and when they need it to accomplish things never before thought possible. Daniel is a serial entrepreneur leading a number of startups in Silicon Valley and has grown several high-tech companies from startup through to commercial success. I'm your host, RJ Lumba. We hope you enjoy the show. If you like the episode, click to follow.
RJ Lumba is the executive chairman of Market Insight Media and the managing partner of GrowthCap. He is the host of Great Entrepreneurs, a podcast for driven entrepreneurs and business owners. Our podcast covers all topics related to the entrepreneurial journey, from ideation to execution to optimization and to reaping the rewards of a well-run business. In the minutes ahead, we'll share with you unique insights and tactics from some of today's most accomplished and inspiring entrepreneurs.
Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. It's a delight to be with you.
Great to be here.
So this is the first time we've had an entrepreneur in the space tech industry come on. So I'm very excited for this. Maybe just to kick off, tell us a little bit about what Orbit Fab does.
Oh, the tagline is gas stations in space. Refueling satellites in orbit is what we do. People used to throw satellites away, despite the fact that they're worth hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes billions of dollars. It's almost unthinkable, but you can't just put a satellite in space and have it stay there. They always drift. Like the gravity field is lumpy and there's nothing to grab onto. So they're constantly drifting out of the way. And the only way to stay still is to use fuel to put them back there, like all the time. And when you run out of that fuel, now you've got to get rid of them. Otherwise, they're going to drift in places you don't want them, right? They can become dangerous space junk. So there's never been a way to extend the life of a satellite, but also upgrade them, repair them, move them between orbits. In the US government, like the biggest national security assets, if they have to move them because maybe someone's satellite is coming and poking them, but maybe they want to do another job somewhere else, they call a 3 or 4-star general because it takes the fuel out of the satellite and means at the end of the life, they're gapped, right? They don't have a capability, which is like imperative. So they got this real problem. They don't have fuel. So everyone's realized the commercial side, the government side, they absolutely desperately need this fuel. It didn't exist. No one had gas caps. No one had a way to supply the fuel. We've got in front of that and solved it. Everyone's now seeing this new paradigm where you can actually do these things in orbit.
You know, it's really fascinating what's been happening over the past few decades in the whole space industry. It seems like there was a span of time where it was just about NASA doing everything that had to do with space. And then there became the space tourism. Well, before that, it was SpaceX. And that kind of shone a light on other things that were happening as well. And as I was coming to do research for this conversation, the industry, there's hundreds of companies that are touching space tech, if not directly involved. To the regular listener out there that doesn't know much about this industry, how would you break it down into the different players?
First of all, you have to understand how ubiquitous the space industry is on touching our lives these days. It's almost completely invisible. But let's just take GPS, right? It was built so the government could guide things on the other side of the world because the Navy had to know where their ships were. And that was actually really hard when we only had sextants, right? They built GPS to know where that was. And all of a sudden, we have a company like Uber. Like, think of all of the apps that you open up and there's a map. It doesn't work without that positioning system. And more important than the maps, things people don't even realize, the timing signal comes for free. We get a GPS signal sends you a plus or minus 4 nanosecond timing. It's used for closing financial transactions at all of the banks. Our entire global financial system runs off GPS timing signals. It is terrifying to think that that might go away. Sure, you can't get an Uber, but you can't even get your money out of the bank, right? Everything would stop. And that's just position navigation time. The entire industries are built around that. You think about communications, the ability, first that was how you got phone calls and television across the world. Now we have fiber optics, but the amount of data that still goes through space And we're seeing the new launch vehicles, like SpaceX has really come to the fore. Reusable rockets have dropped the cost of doing business in space by a factor of 10.
Mm-hmm.
We're making the satellites reusable by giving them fuel. Fuel is the one consumable. They run all the electronics off solar cells. But to keep them in position, to keep them coordinated, you need fuel. It's the one consumable. Making the satellites reusable, allowing us to go to a cell phone type model where you can have a tow truck, like a servicing vehicle that can upgrade the payloads. It's going to drop the cost of doing business in space by another order of magnitude. At that point, building 100,000, building 1 million cell phone towers in orbit, we'll be able to run telecommunications cheaper through space than on Earth. Like the majority of the $2.7 trillion comms industry is going to go through space. These are the paradigm shifts that are coming, let alone like everything you mentioned. We're finally going to have space tourism, right? We're going to have asteroid mining because we have that utility. But things people don't think of, if you can think of a medical procedure, you can lower the stress on your heart if you could be in a lower gravity. Mm-hmm. Right? You might be able to live longer because you've got less stress on your body. I think aged care will move to space. I think medical will move to space. I think manufacturing will move to space because we're able to mix things together that never would mix, right? You can mix lead and lithium. The density on those is massively different. Try and make an alloy out of that. It's terrible, right? A whole bunch of semiconductors with internal buoyancy effects cause dislocations and shatter the semiconductors. The material science, the crystals we can grow for vaccines, all of these things are incredible. That's going to move to space. In the next 50 years, the economy in space is probably going to be bigger than the economy on Earth. That's what's getting built right now, and people don't even realize.
Fascinating. How many satellites are up there now? I mean, when we think of space, I mean, this is an incredible amount of area that presumably you can fill up with manufacturing plants, like you mentioned. So how many satellites now are kind of around Earth?
Big bottleneck has been launch, right? Now the cadence, like the reusable launch vehicles and the cadence SpaceX is getting and others are trying to catch up, that's changed dramatically. So a decade ago, the number was about 1,500. Mm-hmm. 5 years ago, the number was about 2,500, 3,000. Today, the number is 6,000, 7,000. Mm-hmm. This plot's an exponential, but only 2 decades ago, the number was like 100 or 200. It was so small. It's really, really starting to accelerate. The planned constellations are tens of thousands. I've seen one planned for 250,000. I expect there'll be millions of satellites in about a decade.
And what portion now are using your services to refuel?
So we only just qualified and got accepted our gas cap. Right. The first thing was there was no gas cap. They had a valve on there to fill the satellites on the ground, but they basically welded it shut. Right. They put a cap on it. They put a cap over the cap. They lock it shut. They cover it insulation. We've now developed the gas cap that they can put on. It's the same size, weight, and cost as the valves they had, so it's an easy replacement and makes them amenable for refueling. We've only shipped a couple of dozen because we've only been going at it this year. We've been developing that for a while, but it's a complex thing. We launched the first fuel depot a few years ago, and this little minimum viable product had our first version of our fueling port, and it incorporated all the best ideas we had onto what a satellite gas cap should look like. And after we did the fueling on the ground, and we found a whole bunch of reasons that we wanted to improve it, we put it into space. We went to the customers and said, why didn't you buy this? It's now flown in orbit, put it on everything. And they said, hell no, it sucks. Right? This is perfect product development. It sucks. But we said, why does it suck? And they came back with a long list of reasons. We forced them to think through what they would do if they were refueling and what it would interact with and how that would work. And because we'd already lived through a lot of those problems, we turned around within 2 months and came back and said, here's your design, right? This fixes all of the problems. And we turned all the critics then into champions. That was like a watershed moment. And that's resulted in us now, and we're 6 years old, we've got 40 million of contracts. We got a backlog of almost 20 million. And we've now got some of the biggest organizations in the world. We've got US Space Force lining up. Like we're ahead of anybody else in making this and locking it up. So now the momentum's created. But to get to that path and start building it and getting into a while, now we're seeing that inflection point. And every gas cap, like we sell them for $30,000 a piece, which sounds expensive for a valve, but it's about as much as the fill drain valves I have right now. Every valve that we sell is $30,000. It's $7 million of expected revenue. Because they're buying these valves to sell fuel, and we've already established a price with the US government of $200,000 per kilogram. You might think that there's $760,000 a gallon, right? And gas is not expensive at the corner store. The Space Force Association Journal, they had Space Force published this sort of analysis and article that said just on delaying asset replacement, Not on prevailing in conflict and being able to outmaneuver anybody, like the things that actually matter, just on being able to extend the life and delay their asset replacement. The fuel was worth $800,000 per kilo. And we're selling it at $200,000 a kilo. It's a steal. We do that at 90% gross margins, right? The value created here is just awesome.
Now, not many people could do this. To start a company such as Orbit Fab, you take the kind of population of entrepreneurs, there's a tiny fraction of that population that could actually, start a space tech company. Tell us about your background.
I got an engineering degree in Australia 25 years ago when the Australian government, there was bipartisan support for never having a space agency. There was like one space company there doing telecoms and pretty much nothing else. But I decided I want to do something useful for the world. Maybe I read too much science fiction. But when I looked at how do we address existential risks, what's worth working on, what will people think back on in 100 years or 1,000 years and say that's the thing that generation did that we should have put more into. And I decided it was getting off this rock, right? We should get humans off. We'll address a bunch of existential risks if we can move humanity into space. And so not having an option to join anyone else's vision on that, I wrote down a list of industries I thought could pay for the first permanent jobs in space. And in first year university, that was mining and tourism. I've added things like manufacturing and entertainment content, a bunch of other things now. But I decided back then I was going to chip away at asteroid mining because I didn't think I was as good as a tour operator. And so I built a dozen satellites as an engineer and then started building companies. Orbit Fab is number 4. But it was that sort of 20 years of experience in the industry. The last company I ran, we built thrusters to move satellites around in orbit. And so we were in the middle of those trades where our customers were going, well, is it more fuel efficient, less fuel efficient? Everything is about fuel efficiency when you only have one tank of fuel. So I understood that pain. So it was this mix of opportunity, serial entrepreneur, looking for a way to make a bustling in-space economy that can one day support permanent jobs in orbit, right? And a whole bunch of luck. And I just started asking these friends this question, what's the value of extra fuel in space? $1 million per kilogram blew my mind. Just blew my mind. I turned down checks on other things I was looking at and said, I got to do this one.
It's a bit daunting to start a space company, especially one that involves manufacturing and upfront investment. What are typically the economics you're looking at in terms of when you actually start generating money off of your contracts and when you start earning a profit?
You've got to contextualize this. The company that I ran before this, we were ostensibly an asteroid mining company. And you think that refueling in gas stations is capital intensive? No, that one was insane, right? I focused that company on building the thrusters that could move satellites in orbit, but we built thrusters that could run off the propellants that one day you could make from an asteroid, right? It was in line with a long-term strategic plan. So Orbit Fab, we want to be the biggest customer of asteroid mining. We want to be downstream oil and gas, refinery, storage, and distribution. Okay, we want to be the industrial chemical supply chain company for the industry. And right now we are laser focused on storage and delivery, right? And so we narrowed that down to what can we eat today? What will make a hell of a lot of money today? And we lucked out on this opportunity. Then what we did was attack and say, right, how do we drive the capital out of it? Okay, so Orbit Fab has a fundamentally different philosophy from, for example, SpaceX, where everything is vertically integrated. And if you're Elon Musk and have access to infinite capital, you can do that, right? But we don't build satellite buses. And there's 2 reasons for that. One is it takes a lot to build that team, and that takes capital. You're up against all the other companies who want to be the best in the world at that, and we don't want to be the best in the world at that. We want to be the best in the world at delivering and selling fuel, right? And so we get to leverage everybody else, but also we're not then in competition. So anyone that's building satellites sees us as independent. And so if there's another company that's building satellites and trying to do the refueling, they prefer to partner with us, which helps us get that gas cap in, which creates an enormous moat, right? And we can double down on that because we're not in competition with anybody else's existing business models. So that's been key. So we don't build satellites. We don't build rockets. Right? There's a whole bunch of things we're not building ground stations. We need all of those. They'll become our customers. And then a lot of those companies will become our customers as they start doing more stuff in space. So that was a trick to it, was really, how does that reduce our CapEx because we don't have to develop these things, but stay laser focused on what we're doing. So that was one part. The other was, and we started 2 years before Space Force existed. And so the Air Force who were running the satellites, they didn't know how to spell satellite servicing. They couldn't get it. But as Space Force formed, right, and it was done because space is a contested environment, the Russians and Chinese are poking at American satellites right now. They know that there's one tank of gas and they can just chase us out of fuel and then we're stuck. We lost the capability. And so it became an imperative for Space Force to solve this problem and build resiliency. And a lot of that comes around getting fuel. And so by leveraging on that, we can get those government dollars, which are cash up front, and cover a lot of the development, the testing, the demo flights, and everything else. And that reduces the amount of capital we need from investors. So we've constantly been looking at how we do that. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, we do have a challenge. We build the gas caps, we design it, we spend all this R&D, we sell these gas caps for next to nothing, and then people buy the gas cap and they wait until they've run out of their first tank of fuel, which might be 5 years, before they want to buy more fuel. So we've always known we had this gap we had to cover. And we're doing it because the government's prepaying on fuel. The first contract that we have for delivery in orbit is fuel for the US government, and they're prepaying. They'll pay 98% before we deliver, right? Mm-hmm. They're paying it in a nice ramp that matches our costs. And then the other side, for the commercial folks, we offer them a take or pay contract because they realize once they take fuel, then there's profits they'll miss out on if they don't get the fuel. In fact, the engineers get hold of it and go, oh, great, I can shrink my fuel tank because I can refuel. I'll put more transponders on. We can close all of our mass budgets. Everything's great. But now they really need that fuel or they're going to miss their market. And so the CFO gets worried about that. We go in and say, look, we'll guarantee you the price. We'll guarantee to deliver. You've got to guarantee you're going to buy it then. I can take that forwards contract and go and finance against that. And so we end up with great cash flows, even though it's a long time until we deliver fuel. And that's been one of the keys. Lower the capital, bring forward the cash flow. That's been the mantra since we started.
I was doing research on the company, and you do have good backers, very reputable, well-known backers. Are you able to bring in that capital? Because they know you, you've been around, they've been around, and so it's relatively easy to discern how you would kind of build the company and make it successful.
Some of the investors in us have been around for 100 years, right? This is Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. Munich Re, one of the biggest insurance companies in the world, came in because they're the biggest underwriter of satellites and rockets, and they saw the risk profiles changing. If you can get satellite servicing and refueling to work, you can overcome a whole bunch of failures and reduce that cost and introduce new insurable events that they're going to be needed for. So these strategic investors see how much this industry is going to change. And really what they're buying is a front seat on that. So for Munich Re, for example, they wanted to know what satellite servicing was going to do. So that's all the tow trucks, debris removal and moving satellites to new orbits, repairs, upgrades, all those kinds of things. They're all our customers. In fact, they're all our early customers because the tow trucks, like you build a shiny tow truck and tow 2 satellites and throw the tow truck away. That's what you have to do if there's no fuel. It doesn't make any sense. So all of those companies have come to us for fuel. We've got a front seat on that. And now Munich Re, being investors, also get that kind of visibility. And so that was huge for them. Whereas for companies like Lockheed and Northrop, it was really about their primary business selling to the US government. And as the US government is realizing they need a lot of fuel, Northrop and Lockheed don't want to be locked out of proposals because they don't have access to the key tech, right? The requirements come in saying we want $1 billion satellite. It's got to have a fueling port that's compatible. And if they don't have access to that, then they're not compliant. And so what they've bought is access to the tech. Like we bought them in at the same time. So no board seats, no ROFRs, nothing onerous on the company, but they have access to the tech and that's what they needed. So then they can stay in the game and keep winning and hopefully work with us to find ways that they can get ahead of the game and other competitors. That's what they're looking for. For us, of course, the partnership is fantastic. We get folks looking and reviewing and critiquing everything we're doing. They've got great resources that we can tap into. They've got good contacts with the government so they can help us to get things through and make the sales. It's really mutually beneficial. It's been great.
Now, reflecting back on the different companies you've helped build or you built, being the lead person, what is easier now? I'm sure you still have obviously challenges building Orbit Fab and scaling it, but what's easier now because you've done it multiple times over?
Gosh, every time I learn new lessons. The hope is that you don't have to learn the same lesson twice. Yeah, I could run through all the lessons I've learned from all the companies and then the lessons I've learned from this one. What's easier is that at least the stages that I've been through in startups, I've seen some of the dynamics, right? And so when I see cracks, I know what they are, and I know things that have got through before. I know the questions to ask. And that's what comes with experience. Otherwise, you really lean heavily on your advisors. And I do now for things that, as we're growing the company beyond what I've worked with before, it's the advisors, it's the board, et cetera, that I need to be asking, like, here's the situation. What am I missing? What's about to happen and how do I navigate through it? And you just 100% rely on that network.
And have you taken team members from your prior companies to the current one, or is this like a new, more complicated thing you're doing?
Previous employees are now advisors. My chairman is now an investor. In fact, he teamed up with my former chief operating officer and set up a VC fund that then invested in the company. Some of our investors came over and they're also on the cap table of this company. So yeah, there's been a bit. There's also this intellectual cross-pollination where people have gone off now into companies that are our customers and our partners and the like. So yeah, you build those networks and they stay with you.
What's currently your biggest challenge?
Gosh, biggest challenge. We're at that point where we've just gone through one of the stages where all the systems fail in the company and you've got to rebuild it, right? So now we're at 70 odd people and things are absolutely dynamite. When you hit 120, I'm told it breaks again, right? And so how do I set up and navigate that in the culture change? How do we make sure that we had to go from move fast and break things, right? We put up the 2 test beds on the space station. NASA said it would take 24 months. We did it in 4. And we did it by making friends and getting waivers and taking a lot of risk. Then we put up the first fuel depot. We did it as a 6-month development program for a free-flying satellite in the middle of COVID. And there were things that did not work very well, but it was the highest velocity learning opportunity. Then we started selling to the US government and they said, no, it's got to be reliable. We had to change the DNA of the company to build reliable product without losing the go fast. But go fast and break things does not work. You cannot tell your government you're going to give them something that'll break, but don't worry, we'll learn. No. This is a $1 billion asset. You can't afford that. So we had to change the DNA of the company. That's now been absolutely firing. New team, like new chief operating officer, new chief engineer. We delivered 25% of our deliveries this year were actually scheduled for next year. Like they've been ahead of schedule. So the team is rocking. How do I hold that as we get to 120 people and not break it? Right, that's the most valuable thing that we have is just this team cohesion is fantastic. And the other thing is now we've brought the product to market. I've got to get everybody to do it, and nobody wants to be first. And so we're still fighting this market timing thing. And while we're pretty sure we've nailed it, and right, every week that goes by, every sale that we make is like another notch in the cane kind of thing, right? It's all adding up to the fact that this is going to succeed, but it's not guaranteed yet. And when the markets went south a couple of years ago, our commercial market pushed out because all the startups, they were just went into survival mode. All the commercial folks are like, great, the pressure's off. The startups aren't hounding us. And so everything pushed out of it. The government, however, moved timelines to the left. So we've been somewhat fortunate in that, right? But that balance, where is the market, is one that I get asked most by our investors. And the proof is in the pudding, right? 40 million of contracts and growing. But everybody's watching that to see exactly how big it's going to be. We got a line of sight to almost $500 million of revenue in 2028. We're feeling pretty damn good about it right now. But it's a startup. The knife edge between greatness and oblivion is pretty sharp.
And in terms of your ability to recruit top talent, are folks in this industry just so excited by the mission of certain companies? So engineers that are involved in, space tech, they're automatically drawn to an opportunity to work with Orbit Fab.
There are people like that, but you've got to realize the space industry right now it's so hot. There's so much exciting stuff happening. I mean, SpaceX just landed a skyscraper. They caught a skyscraper with chopsticks. How insane is that? And just that is going to change the industry. There are so many things you could look at and say, these are going to change the industry. This is like we're making the future here. It's amazing. So it gets people interested in this field, but they have a lot of choice, right? So we've got to make sure this is the best work environment, that the team is cohesive. Like we've got to have everything else as well. It's not enough to just have mission. The mission definitely helps, gets people in the door, but we've got to really keep them there by treating our people well.
And then did you purposely pick Colorado to be based, and for what reason?
We set up in Silicon Valley, and that was a great place to raise money and get started. But aerospace engineers there aren't as common as they are here in Colorado. And the software companies know that they're good systems thinkers, right? They can write code. So they'll pay them a big salary and teach them to write code. How do we compete with that, especially when it was hot, right? And so we made the decision, let's come to Colorado. It's like one of the 3 places in the US with the highest density of aerospace jobs. So the workforce is already here. The partners are already here. There's a lot of Space Force and government operations here. And so it made sense for us as the best place to build our team. And that's absolutely come through.
Excellent. Last 2 questions. One is, can you tell us about a person who has had a profound influence on you?
Gosh, too many to count. It's probably a Canadian mentor who hired me for my first actual job in the space industry after I was building satellites in my garage and things like that for fun. He taught me systems engineering in a really good way and a whole bunch of things that the textbooks don't tell you, or that, frankly, I think the textbooks get wrong because they're written for a different paradigm. And so thinking through things from first principles, being able to stitch together, it doesn't matter how good your technical solution is. It's got to be one that customer likes, that serves the customer's needs, that is profitable for the company, that is financeable. Like there's so many other things to consider. So that's where, as a systems engineer, I realized, it's not just about the technical. I got to start thinking bigger. Now I'm running a company. It's a massive systems engineering challenge, which is kind of fun. And I credit Kieran Carroll in Canada as one of the people that set me on that path.
Last question. Can you tell us about a charity, cause, or other endeavor that you're passionate about?
I'm very passionate about getting people into space. Mm-hmm. And so there's a whole bunch of organizations that are helping people get into the space industry, that are helping the space industry advance from sort of the non-commercial side. So, gosh, I started out in the National Space Society. That helped me cut my teeth. That's a real grassroots sort of community organization that then is able to lobby politicians and do things on that level, because that's what the community is good at. And then there are some professional organizations that I really get behind and like to support. And for our specific corner of the space industry, CONFERS is the industry association for satellite servicing. And we've been a huge supporter of that since it got started, about a year after we got started. You can hear my life has been pretty much consumed by the space industry for 25 years. I love it. I support it. I think it's humanity's future. And that's why I push as hard as I can.
Fantastic. Well, Daniel, I want to thank you again for taking the time to chat with us today. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks. I loved it. It's great.